All right, good evening and welcome. It is about almost 6 o'clock, so we will get started about a minute early. I'm trying to finish up promptly tonight so that I can go and take my wife out to our 22nd wedding anniversary. We're going to go grab dinner. I think we're going to Olive Garden. So anyway, I want to show you a couple things here before we jump into stuff. If you guys want to introduce yourself tonight, let me know who you are and where you're from. Looks like we've got a few people on. Let's see here. I'm going to go show you the schedule while I do that. So who you are and where you're from, and why are you coming to a class about lease option stuff, maybe? That sounds like a good question. While you do that, I'm going to show you the schedule for upcoming classes. So the local meetup classes. So tonight we're doing Analyzing Deals 201, Selling with Lease Option. This is basically the second night of doing deal analysis with Brian's spreadsheet. And then next week is Nomad with Lease Option Exit Overview, so we'll go into a little bit more detail. I think actually I swapped these. They were originally in the other order where we were going to go over the book, which you can get access to right here. If you go to click on Nomad book, it'll pull up the page and you can actually read through the book for your city. But we swapped them. Tonight I'm going to do the spreadsheet version of this presentation, and then we're going to go over how Nomad with Lease Option Exit Overview works in detail. And that's partially because I emailed everybody saying that tonight was the spreadsheet one, when in fact it was the other order, so I messed up, so I figured I'd just keep it there. So welcome Elijah, Fort Collins, should lease option exit as a way to fund the next home purchase. Yep, we'll talk about that tonight. And Elijah, if I forget to do that, let me know, remind me, and I will go into some detail about that too. Daniel, Fort Collins, should lease option says, I may in the future wish to sell current assets, upgrade to better quality or multifamily. Yep, and we're gonna definitely go over that tonight too. Remind me about CapEx and how we can kind of constantly be getting better quality stuff and newer stuff. Or multifamily, you could definitely trade some stuff in and do multifamily later, but we don't usually use that as part of the lease option kind of exit model there. So anyway, upcoming classes, Nomad with Lease Option Exit Overview. That will be on May 23rd next week. Then we're going to do marketing for tenants. It's going to be on May 30th. Then tenant screening. And then mock tenant screening, which is usually where we kind of go over one together and you kind of pretend you're screening tenants and do that. Not sure how that's going to work in a webinar. We do that in a live seminar and it works out pretty well, but not as much in the webinar. I have to think that one through. I will also tell you I am working on the code for the bookkeeping and accounting for Nomad. So I'm writing the bookkeeping and accounting software application for the website, and that's coming online probably be, I don't know, I've got a memorial this weekend for Tammy's mom, so I'm going to be out of town, but probably in a week or so, I'll probably have the first working copy of that up and available for people to be able to start playing with it, and we can make some corrections and iterate as we go from there. And then I'm also working on the Nomad calculator, the advanced version of that, so that's coming as well. So those are upcoming classes. But tonight, we are going to go over Nomad, lease option, exit, deal analysis. You can go download a copy of Brian's spreadsheet from learntoberichcom/spreadsheet. Right now, when you go to that page, it actually automatically downloads. Just save a copy to your computer. I probably will be changing that in the future. Probably will make it so that you at least have to register on the learntoberichcom website in order to get access to the spreadsheet. So, you know, spread the word now while it's completely unlocked, and if people want to go borrow it, they can. But at some point, you'll need to trade me your email in order to get access to it. So that's coming soon at some point. So go to learntoberichcom/spreadsheet to access that. Jason is still out of town. He is on his road tour, teaching classes to attorneys and CPAs and things of that nature. And so he's not available tonight to do the webinar, but I'm going to cover the spreadsheet anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. But we miss him and want him to come on there in the future. Yeah, you're welcome for me spending some time with you on my anniversary. Crazy, right? It's amazing I made it 22 years with doing some of the silly stuff I'm doing, right? Like teaching classes on my anniversary night. So I don't expect you to be able to read the spreadsheet. I wanted to show you guys how to zoom in and out in case you need to do it on Excel. So down here in the lower corner, you can zoom in or out on Excel, and I'm going to zoom in until it gets big. If one of you guys, there's no way I'd get away with that. Yeah, I agree. It's definitely hard to get away with. So I'm going to zoom in quite a bit. If one of you guys wants to let me know if that's big enough or if I should zoom in a little bit more. What I think is kind of feeling comfortable to me is probably right around here. Can you guys read that fine such that you can see it? Okay, that's good. If for some reason it starts getting hard to read or anything like that, let me know and we can go ahead and do that. So we can go ahead and modify it and make it zoom in a little more. So this is part 2 of the class. Oh, I just noticed a typo in Brian's spreadsheet. Do you guys see that in the little mouse over thing? Annual increase in other income. Wow, that's crazy. All right, I'll have to make a note to tell Brian about that, the typo he has in there. He's usually really, really good about quality stuff, so it's unusual for me to find a typo or an error. So anyway, there's this is part 2 of the deal analysis kind of class series. The first part, we analyzed the deal. If I remember correctly, it was a property up in Water Glen, Celtic Lane, maybe? Does that seem reasonable? And we were, it's short for increase. Yeah, totally. Yeah, so basically we were doing a property here for sale in northern Colorado, Fort Collins area, North Fort Collins actually. And it was a $280,000 house. And by the way, this stuff works in other markets. It works in markets where it's, $90,000 houses. It works in markets where it's $500,000 houses or $1 million houses. The numbers still work, and you may need to modify and tweak it a little bit in order to work in your own current marketplace. And that's what Thursday nights are for. That's what the intention of Thursday nights are for, is that we teach the class on Tuesday. Everyone can come and listen to the class. And then sort of like a book club where everyone reads the same book during the week or during the month. And then you get together once a month and you discuss, what was taught at the class or what was read in the book. The Thursday nights are intended to be the local opportunity for people to get together and discuss that. Now, people in northern Colorado, instead of meeting on Thursdays, we meet on Wednesdays. So tomorrow night is actually a class on partnerships, which is going to be really, really good. Brian's going to go crazy on some partnership stuff. And any information you get from doing these lease options is going to be really helpful when you do partnerships, because we usually recommend you structure your partnerships around these types of transactions that have a start date and an end date in mind from the very beginning, rather than having these open-ended partnerships. Dealing with multiple partnerships right now, not my clients, but on the seller side, where the partners are not getting along. And so it's definitely important to have a clearly defined exit and make sure you guys are both on the same page for doing that. So this is part 2. Part 1 was about the normal Nomad deal analysis, how to analyze a property you're going to move into, live there for a year, convert it to a rental, and how we do the analysis on that. This one's going to take it to the next step. So I'm not going to teach the same class again. I'm going to assume that you've actually watched that previous one and you kind of understand the basics that we've done. I'll run through the numbers really quickly to show you what my assumptions are so that we are all on the same page. But then I'm going to quickly go into what's different about the deal analysis we do when we have a tenant buyer, someone who's going to rent the property from us and eventually a year or two down the road buy the property from us. We call those tenant buyers because they're tenants, but they're also going to be buyers. And those are going to be people that rent from us for a year and then, or 2 years, and then they're actually going to buy. So we'll go into a lot more detail with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the analysis, just start walking down here, and I'll start telling you the story about how to do this. One of the things we like to do, and I know this is a class for nomads, and we're going to definitely change the down payment percentage from 20% to 5% or 3% or 1%, just to kind of show you what the numbers look like. But one of the things we like to do is if nomads are moving into properties, let's say you're a nomad and you've got, I don't know, $200,000 in the bank and you're looking for a way to kind of get started with Nomad. You don't need the full $200,000 in order to get started with your first property. In fact, you could go in there and do a 1% down property, put $3,000 down, and you've got $197,000 remaining. So what do you do with that other $197,000? Some people argue you put it in the stock market. Some people argue you invest in something else to diversify. And that's one way to do it. Another thing you could consider doing is doing these lease option deals where you are going to market out on Craigslist or other places like that, and you tell interested buyers, hey, listen, if you're interested, I'm willing to buy a property, any property that you want to select from the multiple listing service, and then I will purchase that property, rent it to you, and give you the option to buy that property from me. And so you could go ahead and take $60,000 or so of the $197,000 you have remaining after your first deal. Find a tenant buyer who has some down payment, 3%, 5%, somewhere around there down. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And then they could go and pick any property that's currently available for sale in the multiple listing service. You'd then go buy the property and put them in there as a tenant buyer. They'd rent it from you for a year or two, and they'd pre-agree to buy the property from you at some price above what you paid for it. and you'd make a profit by doing that. And the idea is that if they have the choice of any property for sale in the MLS, their percentage for closing on those deals is going to be higher than if you just had a property and were marketing for a tenant buyer, which you can do that as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that idea, but let's pretend for a minute that we're still looking at that same property on Celtic. I don't even know if the property is still for sale. If any of the local guys on here, I know Elijah and Daniel are here, and I think you guys are both aware of that particular property. So if you want to go pull that up and see if it's even still for sale, I don't remember what it was, but it was listed for sale, I think at like 280 or something like that on Celtic over in Waterglen. So if it happens to be still for sale, great. You can kind of use this as a real world example. If not, it's under contract probably because it was only like a couple weeks ago that we did that class and it was available for sale at that point. But I'm going to use the same property just for fun so you guys can see it. So let's pretend for a minute. I'm going to run through the numbers quick. So the value of the property is about $280,000, and we're saying we're buying it for $285,000. And the reason we're doing $285,000 is we're going to ask the seller to contribute $5,000 toward the closing costs. And so we've raised the price from the price that was listed at, which is $280,000, and we're saying we're going to pay you $285,000 for the property, but then we're going to ask for $5,000 in seller concessions, which is what this next field in here, and that's going to be used to pay for some of our closing costs. For now, I'm going to use 20% down, although you could argue that you could do Nomad stuff with this and do it in year 2 and stuff like that, and we'll go back through and change those numbers later. And then we're going to do down payment amount here. It actually does a calculation. Closing cost is that same $5,000 we said for seller concessions. And then rent ready costs, we're assuming that this property in particular needs about $1,500 in order to get ready for rent. Now, if you're going to go and contact somebody, from Craigslist, and you're going to say to them, hey, listen, I'll buy this property from the MLS for you, and you'll be able to purchase it and buy it from us a year or 2 down the road. You're going to be a tenant buyer from us. Are we really going to have rent ready costs? I would argue that in most cases, you probably will not have rent ready costs. They'll be selecting a property that is available from the MLS, and they're going to probably take the property as is. If it's not in good enough condition to buy, you're going to object to things on the inspection and may negotiate some things on there. But in most cases, you're probably not going to have rent ready costs. You could have some, so I'm going to leave it in here just to kind of have it in there, but I don't think it's really required. In fact, we should run it with and without the rent ready costs and see how it impacts our return later on. If you're going to do partnerships and you're going to have an initial reserve amount set up, you'd actually put that number here. We're not doing that tonight. If you were going to bring in a credit partner, you put that somewhere else, and it would pull from the other section of the spreadsheet. I'll show you where that is because some people are going to be in the partnership class tomorrow night. This whole section on the right is for partnership stuffs. So again, the orange fields are for entry things. So if you're going to pay a credit partner, you put in stuff here, deal-based, deal syndicator, money partner, and so on. But this is all the stuff for partners, and that data gets pulled from over here and drags back in over here. But we're not talking about partnerships tonight. Then total cost to close is going to be this $58,500, and that's really the 20% down payment we have on $285,000 plus some rent ready costs. And then this lease option fee. This is where this spreadsheet becomes really helpful for analyzing deals where you're going to do a tenant buyer and bring in a tenant buyer in order to do lease options. So there's 2 different, before I kind of go into the spreadsheet, pause for a minute with me and kind of go over this. There's 2 different ways to think about an upfront option fee that a tenant buyer is giving you. So here's the pretense. I'm going to pretend for a minute that Elijah is actually going to be my tenant buyer. So Elijah decides, hey, James, I want you to go, I'm interested in doing a lease option or rent to own with me. I just got to town. I don't have any job history. I'm starting my own business. So I need a couple years to establish myself in my business so that I can actually get qualified on my tax returns and be able to buy the house. My credit's fine. I've got some down payment money. But right now, because of my tax return situation, I don't have the ability to go out and get traditional financing. And I say, great news, Elijah. I have the perfect program for you. You basically can pick any property that's for sale in the MLS. I will go out there and I will purchase that property. And then you will rent it from me for a year or 2. And then at the end of 2 years, when you have your job history and you're able to go ahead and qualify for a loan, then you would buy that property from me at a pre-agreed upon price. And Elijah says, that sounds pretty interesting, but what price are we talking about? And I say to him, well, the property is selling for about, I don't know, $280,000. The property values in our local market have been going up 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% a year. But you and I are going to agree that the property value that you're going to buy it from me is only going to go up 3% a year or 2% a year or 4% a year, some type of percentage, maybe not the full amount that we're seeing the properties appreciate in our local market, because I believe that you should be doing these transactions as sort of win-win. I think that you should leave a little meat on the bone for your tenant buyer to benefit and want to close. We're not trying to screw over tenant buyers. I want to be very clear about that. We are trying to do a situation where it's a win for the tenant buyer, it's a win for us. Otherwise, let's just agree not to do the deal to begin with. If it's not going to be a win for them, let's just agree, let's not do it. If it's not going to be a win for us, let's not do it. So I go to Elijah and I say, Elijah, so basically this property, 280 plus 3%, let's say it's 300,000, makes the math a little easier. So $300,000 property plus 3%, if you wanted to buy it within the first year, it would be for 309. If you wanted to buy it in the second year, it'd be 318 or 320 or something like that. And Elijah says to me, but what's the alternative? If I wait a year, what do you think this property is going to be worth? And in our marketplace, which the marketplace has been going up about 10% a year, if this $300,000 property went up 10%, you'd be buying the same property for $330 a year from now. So you could go rent another place, any place that you wanted to, and then wait a year and come back and try to buy this same property, and you'd end up buying it for $330. And I'm saying to you, I'll go buy it for you today, and then I'll mark it up 3%, let's say, just for argument's sake, and then you could buy it for me during that time period. And you'll pay me normal rent during that period. And of course, in order for me to go and buy it, I would want you to put up a fee, what's called an option fee. And the option fee gives Elijah the right to buy the property from me at this pre-agreed upon price in order to do that within the first year or two. And I personally like to do 2 years, but you could structure these lots of different ways. So Elijah can come in and he could buy the property from me for 309, or let's call it this way. Let's say you could buy it for 318 anytime during the first 2 year period. So the price is fixed at 318, whether it's year 1 or year 2. So there's really no incentive for him to close early. He can wait the full 2 year period and I can get rent on that money and do that. And so in order to do this, I tell Elijah, so Elijah, I need you to be able to come up with a fee, because I'm not going to go out and buy a property for you just out of the MLS unless I know, I'm convinced that you are intending to buy it. And if for some reason you don't buy it, I have enough discount, basically I got enough rebate on my down payment such that I don't feel as though if I had to go sell it with a real estate agent, I would lose money on the deal. So I'm trying to protect myself and make sure that you are committed to buying the property. And so Elijah says, okay, how much are we talking about? And this is complete negotiation. But I say to him, well, what kind of loan are you planning on getting when you're going to go buy the property with a lender after, you get your 2 years of tax returns? And Elijah says, I'm probably going to get an FHA loan. I had a little credit blemish, a couple years ago, and so I might need to get a little help with an FHA type financing, and get a little kind of credit score reprieve. And so you'll probably need about 3.5% down. So I say, okay, so why don't we plan on you having enough for 3.5% down of that price? With 318 when you do that. And so I say to Elijah, okay, so basically you're going to have to come up with that 3.5% down now before I'm willing to go buy the property. So I want to make sure that you have the down payment and that you're committed to buying it. So we'll say, in this case, let's just use 300,000 times 0.035. Actually, we said 318, didn't we? Okay. So in this case, it works out to be about $11,130. I'm going to go ahead and call that $11,000. Okay. So I say to Elijah, I'd like you to come up with $11,000 as a non-refundable option fee, which means if you have every right to buy the property within the first 2 years for 318. However, if you don't buy the property from me, you are forfeiting that money. Now, I just went through and I started telling you, hey, listen, we want to do these as win-win deals, or let's not do it. Is that a win for Elijah? Is it a win for Elijah to come in and pay $11,000 for the option to buy a property for the next 2 years, and if he doesn't buy it, he forfeits it? Well, let's take a look at that. Let's say Elijah had the ability to get a loan right now, and he went out there and he put 3.5% down and got an FHA loan right now to buy the property. Let's say he could qualify. And let's say 2 years from now, he decided, something? The property value hasn't gone up. I'm going to walk away from the property. I'm going to go sell it because I want to get out of it and I didn't want to do it. So now he has the property that's worth about what he paid for it. Let's assume it's $300,000, and the property value stayed the same. And so he goes and he tries to sell it. When he goes and sells it, how much does it cost him to sell. What are typical transaction costs if you're selling a property traditionally? Well, real estate commissions is one. And while real estate commissions are completely negotiable on the sell side, and actually on the buy side too, but I mean, they're completely negotiable on the sell side, it is very common to have it be 6%. So on a $300,000 property sale, 6% of that is about $18,000. And so, he'll have to go in there and, he'll net about 282. So assuming he went and bought the property for 300 and he sold it for 300, he actually would walk away with about $18,000 less, assuming that all the closing costs were covered by the buyer, which may or may not be true, maybe another 1% or so in closing costs. So let's call it about $21,000 that he'd be down from doing that. So let's say the property even went up to $300,000 or so, he'd still be out this $21,000 in transaction costs in doing this. So to think for a second that he put up $11,000 and he had to walk away from the property, he actually ends up a little bit better than if he had put up the full money to buy the property and then ended up selling it and paying $18,000 in closing costs. And he still has the rights to buy it. So let's say Elijah actually says, after 2 years, him and his wife actually decided, this house isn't big enough for us. We just had 2 sets of twins in the last 2 years. We weren't expecting 4 additional children. This 4-bedroom house or 3-bedroom house is no longer good enough for us. So we're not going to buy it anymore. Well, he still has the right to buy it. And so Elijah may come to me and say, James, I know you and I talked about buying the property for $318 anytime in the first 2 years. And I said, yeah, Elisha, you totally have the right to do that. Are you going to close on it? Because I really want to get cashed out. I really want you to do this. He says, well, unfortunately, this house isn't going to be a good fit for me. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to find a buyer who's going to pay me closer to what the retail price is. And maybe that's closer to $330 or $340 or $350, whatever it is. If it goes up 10% a year for the next 2 years, it's like $360 is what the property will be worth. He says, listen, I've got a buyer who's willing to buy it for me for $360. Can I go ahead and either close on this property and then immediately sell it to someone else for $360? And I'm like, sure. I mean, you have the right to buy this property for $318, and you could sell it to someone else the next day or the very same day for $360 and make the spread. So he says, okay, I could do that. And he says, hey, listen, instead of doing that and having some transaction costs, would you be okay if I assign my right to buy the property to someone else? And I said, sure, as long as the attorneys can work it out and it's legal and ethical and honest and above board, I'm totally happy to do that because I'm going to net the same as if you bought it from me. Just realize that, you're the one that's obligated to buy it from me. And if you don't buy it from me, I'm not going to sell it to someone else unless you kind of forfeit your rights to do so. So the idea is that Elijah still has all of his options for this $11,000 fee, and it seems really reasonable and fair to me to do that. Now, having taken hundreds, if not multiple thousands of calls from tenant buyers over the years, there are very skeptical people out there, and rightfully so. And when they call you, especially people that, the tenant buyers, they tend to be people that, they just had a divorce or they just had a bankruptcy or they had a foreclosure or a short sale or medical bills. Something is preventing them from getting traditional loans. And when they call me, if they can get a traditional loan, I am the very first person to tell them, if you can get a loan right now, you should go talk to a lender, and I'm happy to put you in touch with several lenders. But if you can get a loan right now, you should not do the rent to own with me. You should actually go buy the property direct, cut out the profit that I would need to make to be involved in the deal, and buy the house directly yourself. And so when they call me, I'll tell them, hey, listen, I'm happy to talk to you about the rent to own program. One of the first steps we're going to do after you've had all your questions answered is I'm going to suggest that you call a lender, and I'll give you a couple different lenders. You're welcome to call any lender you want. But I want them to tell me that you are going to be able to get a loan in a year or two, because I don't want to put you in the house only to find out that you can't buy the house from me a year or two. I'm not going to go and buy a house from the MLS for you and offer it to you on a rent to own if you're not going to be able to get a loan in a year or two. It doesn't make sense. I'm not going to accept your option fee and charge you rent only to find out that 2 years from now, you're never going to be able to get a loan. So I want you to go call a lender and find out. And if when you call the lender, and you're going to want to talk to him about probably FHA financing, because it's one of the most forgiving financing programs we have for bankruptcies, foreclosures, short sales, and credit scores and things like that. And so I'm going to want you to go talk to the lender and talk to him about FHA financing and see if you're qualified. Because if you can get your loan now, don't do the rent to own with me. Go buy the property directly yourself, and we all win. Okay? So I tell tenant buyers when they call and do that, all the time to do that. And so occasionally, more often than I'd like to really tell you, it's a good percentage of people, they call up and they're super skeptical about the rent to own. And they don't know me, so I don't take it personally. But they call up and they're like, so what's the deal with this rent to own? And I try to explain to them, I go buy a property from the MLS and I mark up the price. And you're going to pay more than what the property that I paid for the property. I'm trying to make a profit here, and you're going to pay me rent, and the rent does not get applied to your purchase. Basically, rent is another area for me to profit, and you're not going to get the benefit of debt pay down, and I'm going to get the tax benefits. And they think that I'm screwing them. They think that that we are trying to take advantage of them, and that it's not fair, and that the entire rent payment should get applied to the purchase price. And that's just not how my program works. You could structure one that works that way. I don't recommend it. But I think that the big thing for them is that they feel as though they're skeptical. They feel like you're trying to take advantage of them. So, part of our program is to explain to them how this works and why it's not a scam, why it's not, doing this, and why it has to be win-win. And so I'm going to run through the numbers and show you why it is a deal for us, but it is also a deal. It's a win for Elijah or whoever the tenant buyer is in that. Does anyone have any questions on that? Because I know that comes up a lot. It's like, are we screwing somebody over by doing these types of deals? And the answer is no, that is not our intent to do that. Is it true that some people like Elijah are not going to buy the property? That we're going to go buy the property from the MLS, they're going to give us $11,000, and something is going to change where they're not going to want to buy the property a year or two from now, and they're going to walk away from $11,000. Is that true? Yes, there's a certain percentage. That's right, Donna. Lease option fee is non-refundable. That is correct. Daniel says, do you usually recommend that homeowners who wish to place a lease option on a house they own, that they go through an agent like you? No. So I don't. In fact, the Colorado Real Estate Commission, I know this is the second part to your question. The Colorado Real Estate Commission says that real estate agents are not qualified to structure lease options subject to types of deals, that it's not part of their training, and that you should bring in an attorney to structure those types of deals. And so, no, I do not recommend that you bring in a real estate agent to structure these lease option deals. I teach the strategy to you, and I tell you should go get an attorney and get the help of an attorney to structure these. But I do it for you because I think it's in your best interest to understand that selling a property to me through me as a real estate agent, me charging you 3% and having the buyer's agent charge you 3% when you go to sell a property, I don't think is always the best rule. There are some times when it is the best. When you have a really tight time frame, you want to sell retail and you want to kind of put it on the MLS and get maximum exposure. Sure, I'm happy to do that for you, and I have clients that do that with me. However, for a lot of investor clients and Nomad clients, you don't need to sell with a real estate agent. You could go ahead and, if you're used to renting properties, this is a way to use a rent kind of portion of your property and then sell it after a year or two to a tenant buyer. And so, no, I recommend you get an attorney to do that. So the second part of your question, Daniel, let me make sure I got that too. So that you can explain things to them more effectively after your thousands of calls and experience. Yeah, so I do some training on that. We have a whole training thing that I think we're going to do for the Nomad stuff, but I've done it on Wednesday night, and there's a recording of it. It's called Tenant Buyer Sales and Marketing, where I walk you through the psychology of what tenant buyers are thinking, how to take the phone calls, how to generate the phone calls, and kind of how to talk to them about the lease option model and how that works. And so we have a whole thing on that. So Elijah says, so using the lease option fee upfront allows you to take a portfolio loan with less than 20% out of your pocket. Sort of. So you can use the option fee as part of your down payment with a portfolio lender. That is correct. Some of you, though, will need to have the full 20%, and then it's almost like getting an instant rebate when you buy of $11,000. So we have to come up with $58,500 to do the loan. But like that day, the day that you buy the property, the tenant buyer is releasing the $11,000 or whatever it is that they're doing for you. And there's some mechanics, so you want to protect yourself. But you're getting like the $11,000 back at the very beginning. Okay, so to kind of come back around as to how I got to this part of the conversation, I'll take a drink and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. So the $11,000 fee, you can sort of look at that in one of two ways. You could either think of it as, I had less down payment in the deal. So instead of having to come up $58,500, I really only had to come out of pocket $47,500. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, I really did come up with $58,500 as a down payment, but I instantly got $11,000 in upfront cash flow or profit. Okay, so You can look at it in both of those ways, and I think there are times when you can justify looking at it both ways. I think when you're doing Nomad, I think looking at it as sort of like upfront cash flow is a better way to look at it than to think that you really got 100% rebate on your down payment because you bought the house a year before. Because remember, with Nomad, you're moving into the property for a year. You're living there for a year before you do this. And so you really do have to come up with 5% down on this, $15,000 or so, or 1% down or 3% down, whatever the loan you're on. And so you come up with 15 grand down. And even if you got 15 grand as an option fee a year later, it's not like you really didn't have a down payment. You got reimbursed the down payment, but it was a year later. And so when I look at it that way, it's much more like profit or cash flow to me. Okay, so continuing on the story here. So basically, in this particular example, $280,000 property, I convince Elijah. I say, Elijah, if you want to do this deal, if you want to buy this property, it's going to be $11,000 an option fee, and then you're going to pay me rent every month, and rent does not get applied to your purchase, but the $11,000 as the option fee does. Okay, so rent does not get applied toward the purchase of the property, but the $11,000 you actually gave me as an option fee counts as your down payment when you go to purchase the property. And so one of the things we need to be super careful with is we need to go find out what lender they plan to use when they get their loan from you a year or two down the road, when they go execute on their option agreement and they want to decide to actually purchase the property from you. We want to go talk to the lender and say, okay, Elijah is going to be buying this property from me in a year or two, and he's going to have an option on it for the next year or two. What paperwork do you need to see, Mr. Lender? What paperwork do you need to see for me to provide Elijah now that when he gives me this $11,000 now, that it can be applied legitimately for underwriting to get the loan? And you want to have that conversation with the lender before you enter into this agreement. You don't want to find out 23 months in that you didn't do the paperwork correctly, and now they got to scramble to find another $11,000 to close so that they can close on the property. That's a big mistake. Okay, so talk to the lender and plan this out ahead of time. And most lenders can work with something like this. There probably are a few out there that have no idea this is too exotic for them, and that they don't understand it. And so you want to find a lender that understands it. Okay, so getting back to the story. So we would have needed $58,500 to close on this. And we're saying to Elijah, you're going to need to come up with 11 grand in order for me to go out there and buy this property and then rent it from you. And we're going to talk about pricing and stuff later on. I'll show you where that is in the spreadsheet. So really the net, and this I think was what Elijah was asking before about, the net investment. So really out of pocket, if I'm getting the $11,000 before right when we go under contract, and basically it's mine to keep as long as we close on the deal, I'm really coming out of pocket $47,500. So it's a smaller down payment. Now, the way we calculate return on investment later on here, we figure out how much income we have on the property divided by how much we had to invest to get there. What happens if Elijah came in and Elijah had, instead of $11,000, let's say he had $58,500. Now all of a sudden, I have no money in the deal. And so any profit that I make on that deal is an infinite return because I have $0 invested. If Elijah said to me, hey, listen, my parents just passed away. In the past, I've been really horrible about managing money, and I had a bankruptcy. But I've got another 2 years to go before my bankruptcy is up. And my parents actually gave me an inheritance of about $100,000, and I think they would really want to see me go buy a house. And so I have full 20% down. That's what I plan on doing. I will go ahead and use an option fee of 20% down on this property, and I'm willing to do that, and I will buy the property from you a year or two from now when my bankruptcy is up and I can get my loan. That's a almost no risk deal, right? And someone's going to come in and they're going to say, I will actually give you as an option fee the entire down payment, and it allows you to go in there and buy the property from them and rent it to them for a year or two. And if they don't buy it, they're saying they're going to forfeit the $58,500. Now, I think you work with, in general, and not just in this case, but in general, you do everything you can in order to help your tenant buyers buy the property. We want to go out of our way, bend over backwards to see if we can help them buy. Even if they tell us, hey, listen, I don't think we're going to end up exercising our option and buy the property. I actually don't think we're going to do it. I want to have a sit down with them. I just want to talk to them. hey, listen, you've got some equity in the property. It's a really good idea for you to do it. Do you have a friend who wants to buy the property? I'd rather not, take the property back and sell it. Although if you have the opportunity and they don't, they walk away, it's not a bad position for you to be in. You can go sell the property to someone else on the MLS, or do another lease option tenant buyer, do another option fee and give someone else an opportunity to buy it from you with probably at a raised price, higher than what you're doing before. Okay. So let's put it back here to 11,000. Whoops. So back to the story where Elijah has 11 grand. The first loan amount is 228. That's taken 20% of that original purchase price. And I'm looking up on my phone what my lender sent over for this morning. So the interest rate when we did this kind of class last time was 4.375 for conventional, 80% down fixed. And so I'm going to use that same number there. The FHA number is 3.75. The VA number is 3.75. So you could argue that the interest rate might be a little bit lower than that. If you're doing an investor deal, which in this case it would be considered investor, it's probably a little bit higher than that. But if you're getting a portfolio loan, you're only doing a 5-year ARM or something like that, it's probably a little lower than that. Okay? So 4.375, 30-year loan. We're not doing a second mortgage, so we can ignore all those. The finished square footage, it was about 1,500 square feet, although this is really only used in one spot. I don't usually fill it in. Land value, we're saying that 15% of the value of the property is in land. It's a residential property, and I'm saying our effective income tax rate, I'm going to use 15%. I think 20% is a little bit optimistic for most people that are doing this. Okay. So this is all the left-hand side. We just did the numbers for that. There's no more to do on the left. And I'm going to start moving over to the right here. So how much is rent going up each year? Well, if you're going to kind of model this out beyond year 2 or 3, you might say rents are going up at about whatever percentage you want to use here. I would recommend probably about 3% per year. But what I might do is I might actually use the same rent in year 1 as I do in year 2. So I might tell the tenant buyer, your rent is fixed for the first 2 years at whatever number we decide. And then after that, it goes up 3% a year if you go beyond that, because you can extend the lease option agreement for 1-year increments with additional option fee and some other stuff like that. So we can get complex. We can get complicated with it later. I don't know if I'm going to cover that tonight. Okay, so monthly rent. I think the last time we did this analysis on here, I think what we determined was that rent on this property was probably going to be about $1,795 a month on about a $300,000 property. So let's say, hypothetically, I'm going to kind of change the story a little bit to show you how this works and how it varies. Let's say rent on this property was like $1,700 per month. Okay. And let's say Elijah comes to me and he says, hey, James, I want to do this deal with you, and I don't quite have the $11,000. And I say, okay, Elijah, I really would like to see you have at least enough to do an FHA loan, 3.5% down. I really would prefer closer to 5% down. And the way that I justify the 5% down is I say to Elijah, if you don't buy this property, I'm going to need to go hire a real estate agent. And it's not me, but this is like for you saying this. I know, Elijah, I'd like to buy this property from you, but if you don't buy it from me in a year or 2, I'm going to need to go hire a real estate agent and sell the property. And so if I have to go hire a real estate agent, it's probably going to cost me about 6%. So if I charge you, if I get an option fee for 5%, then I'm barely covering my costs in order to get out of this thing and be whole. And so you can easily make a case as to why you'd want to get a 5% fee on that. And so basically you can look at here and say the option fee is, $15K or whatever it is in order to get closer to 5. But Elijah says, hey, listen, I don't have 5% down, or I don't have 3.5% down. I say, okay, Elijah, what do you have? He says, I have 8K. So I have $8,000 down. But I can actually make payments over time. So I say, okay, if we can go to the attorney, and if the attorney can structure this in a way that I feel comfortable with and you feel comfortable with it, I'll let you make payments of let's call it $200 a month to get you up to that $11,000 that you need. So you really need about $3,000 more. So if we do 200 or 250 a month, 250 a month is about $3,000 over the first year. Is that right? 250, 3,000. Yeah. So it's about $3,000 over the first year. So I say, okay, Elijah, you don't have the full $11,000 that I would like you to have. If you put $8,000 up as an option fee, but then you agree maybe on the 15th of the month, not on the first, it's not part of your rent, but on the 15th of the month, an additional payment on a promissory note for $3,000. You can make payments on the 15th of the month for $250 a month. That would work for me, and that would be close enough for me to get you to the $11,000 you need down over the first year. And Elijah says, I can do that. We're aggressively saving for a down payment anyway. And so to come up with an additional $250 a month in order to save for our down payment and be able to buy this house in the first year or two, that seems reasonable to me, and I'll go ahead and do that. So you could go ahead and put this other monthly income here in order to have that work. And if you don't want it to increase each year, you'd set the percentage of increase to 0. So in this case, rent is $1,700 a month, but Elijah is paying $250 a month in order to increase his option fee, probably on a 15th of the month payment, in order to get up to the 11 grand or whatever it is. Okay? So that's one way to structure that. And this is a way, when you're thinking about buying these properties, this is a way to help overcome negative cash flow, because rent is rent, right? I mean, $1,795 is what you're getting for rent on the property. That's probably what you need to do. And if we go look down here, the cash flow on our property, it's not amazing. If you remember from the last week when we did this, in our current marketplace, it's really hard to find positive cash flow, putting 20% down in Fort Collins. And so to think, if we're at $1,700 or $1,695, let's say, $1,695 a month rent, you're actually at, negative $7 a month in cash flow in year one. That's about what we're typically seeing on most properties. Sure, the 1 in 50 properties or 1 in 25 properties, you might be able to get a little bit better. But right now, if you're getting somewhere between $1,695 and $1,795, you're not doing great in cash flow. It's $78 a month. So one of the ways you can improve that is you can say, Elijah, I know you have 11,000, but we'd really like to see you at closer to 15. So let's go ahead and agree that if you can make an extra $150 a month or $200 a month or whatever it is, that significantly improves your cash on cash return on investment and significantly improves the characteristics of your investment. Now, this $150 does get subtracted from the purchase price. So remember, the rent is not. Rent is profit. But if you're telling Elijah that, hey, listen, this $11,000 down payment option fee gets applied to your down payment, then this $150, in order to get you up to closer to the 15,000 or whatever number we're trying to get them there, this would also get applied toward the option fee and applied to the purchase price. Okay? So realize whatever you have here, you're really not making that money. You're not making that in addition. What you're really doing is you're moving it from profiting at the very end, when it would have come in as a big lump when you sold the property to them, and you're moving it to the front and as you go, so that you change the characteristics of the investment. Okay? And personally, as an investor, we would prefer, whenever possible, to get money up front. We would prefer to move it from the end up front whenever possible. Some people would argue time value of money. Some people would argue that it's a little bit more safer type investment to have better cash flow up front, and I would agree with all this. So Elijah asks, does paying on a promissory give the lease option buyer vested interest in the property? Yes, this is a common question that we get, and some attorneys would try to argue that if you're giving somebody a rent credit, that is actually giving them an interest in the property, a vested interest in the property, equitable interest in the property is really what it's called, and that this may be considered more of a owner financing situation rather than a lease with an option. And so one of the reasons we want to have them be separate, lease payments, rent payments are rent payments, and the option fee is an option fee that has a promissory note to do that. In my opinion, and I'm not an attorney, you should definitely want to check with your attorney. That's why we always say when we're describing this, as long as the attorney can structure in a way that you feel comfortable and I feel comfortable with it, we can do it this way, where you're paying on the 15th and you're really just paying that option fee that wasn't quite enough up front to make that happen there. And so I think that that's a reasonable way to do it, but definitely check with your attorney to make sure that your attorney feels comfortable with it. So Donna says, if you're living in it for a year nomading, wouldn't year one be zero rent to see a clear picture of ROI? Absolutely. And so we covered that a little bit more last week or 2 weeks ago when we covered just the regular deal analysis. So the kind of context of this particular analysis is you're in your Nomad property doing it. This is an additional investment that you're perhaps buying and then doing that. And then later on tonight, I will also show you how this looks if we just look at year two and ignore the return for year one and look at that. So we'll take a look at that too later when we change this from 20% down to 5% down or something like that. Okay. All right, so other income per month, so you kind of understand this idea of being able to do that. For now, I'm going to put it at 0 and show you what a relatively low return is, and then we'll come back later and we'll kind of add those back in there. Okay. Now, vacancy. So remember the context of our question. If I went to Elijah and I advertised and I found him, and then I told him, I will buy a property from the MLS for you, do we have any vacancy? Is vacancy 3%? I would argue that if you're buying a property for somebody from the MLS, your vacancy is probably going to be 0 unless they actually do not close on the property, and then you rerun your numbers and you put vacancy in there and you kind of redo the calculations. But up front, I don't think there's vacancy there. And so I would argue that you could actually use 0% for vacancy when you're actually selecting a property from the MLS and they are moving in immediately as soon as you close. Okay? And so you can go ahead and do that there. Now, if you're going to go, if Elijah doesn't buy and you got to go put another tenant buyer in there, sure. Or you convert it to a regular rental, yeah, absolutely. Put vacancy back in there, and that seems legit to me. But up front, I don't think you need it in there. We're going to do a similar thing with maintenance too. Okay, so taxes on the property. So this was actually from the MLS where we got the taxes from, so that's where we got that number from. Insurance on the property, you could use whatever number you want to use, but I think $1,400 for $300,000 property seems in the ballpark. The HOA in this property, this was from the actual MLS listing. I think it was $840 a year is what we're seeing for MLS. And then, normally we're actually paying utilities if there's a vacancy. I'm going to go ahead and take that out for now. So what I usually put in there is $100 a year because, once every 3 years I might have a month of vacancy and I'll have to pay for electric and mowing the lawn and all that other stuff on a property. And so I like to put in about $100 a year to cover utilities costs if you're using a 3% vacancy. But in this case, you don't have a 3% vacancy because you're having the buyer select the property and they're going to buy it from you in the first year or two. So I think you could argue that you put in 0 for that. Maintenance on the property. Now, what's different between a tenant buyer and a regular tenant? A regular tenant expects you to provide a property, maintain the property for them, and they're going to, in return, pay you rent. A tenant buyer is expecting to buy the property. They're renting the property from you for a year or two, and at the end of that year or two, they're intending to purchase the property for themselves. So they feel like homeowners. And so the conversation we have with tenant buyers at the very beginning is, listen, I'm willing to do this for you, but since you're buying the property, I expect you to maintain the property while you're there. I expect you to do the normal maintenance on it, and if you need to get a plumber out there or a handyman out there to do something, I expect you to do that. Let me know what's going on with the property, but I expect you to pay for it. Are you okay with that? If they say no, say, listen, I don't know if you're prepared to be a homeowner. Because if you're not able to do that, that's something that a homeowner does. Now, practical matter. Tenant buyer goes, they give you $11,000 down. They go buy a house, and 6 months after they move into the property, you find out there is hot water heater goes, or the furnace goes, or the roof goes to the property. You have a major expense, something that the tenant buyer wasn't expecting, nor were you expecting. And you have, let's call it a $3,000 expense. And the tenant buyer says to you, hey, I gave you all I had in savings in order to do the option fee. I don't have $3,000. I can't handle a furnace. I can't handle the AC to be repaired. So you can go to the tenant buyer and say, okay, we originally negotiated, you were going to buy this house and you were going to get a 15-year-old furnace. So I'm willing to come out there and pay the $3,000 to have the furnace replaced, but I'm going to ask that we raise the price that you're going to buy it from me by $3,000 because now you're getting a brand new furnace. And so the tenant buyer, you need to be prepared to have that money. And the tenant buyer gets a new furnace and the price goes up by $3,000 in order to include the cost of that furnace. Okay. So that's how I would normally handle large expenses that come up. You talk to the tenant buyer and say, we were agreeing that you were going to buy a 15-year-old furnace. Furnace went. I'm willing to come in here and put the $3,000 up. But if for some reason, for when you buy the property, we're raising the price by $3,000 to take into account that new furnace. Okay, so maintenance on the property, you can put in 0. Again, if they don't buy, you're definitely putting in a number here, and you should have reserves set aside in case you need to come up with that $3,000 for the furnace or something like that for a roof. So I still think you need to have some cash reserves. Don't do this super tight. Okay. So maintenance on the property is there. You're going to manage the property yourself because you're probably not going to be able to convince a property manager to do this service for you of going out there and finding a tenant buyer and allowing them, allowing the property manager to find a tenant buyer and put them into a lease option agreement. All right, so to that number here, any additional expenses, you enter those there. So moving down here, now your monthly cash flow on the property. Remember before, when we used $1,795, it was like, I don't know, $70 positive. Now it's $349 because we've taken out maintenance because the tenant buyer is handling it. We've taken out vacancy because they're selecting the property, they're moving in as soon as you purchase the property. And of course, these numbers will change if you convert it back to a regular rental. These are only the numbers when you're doing the lease option. And so your cash return went from whatever it was, $70 to $349 with a cash-on-cash return on investment of 8.83. So you can see this significantly changed the characteristics, and that's without this monthly income. You add in an extra $100 a month here in order to help him get up, to $13,000 or whatever it is. That all of a sudden goes to $449 and 11.35% cash-on-cash return. So it's a significant improvement in cash flow and in the characteristics of the investment itself. And so that's one of the reasons why, in my opinion, between Nomad and lease options, these are the two best investment strategies in northern Colorado especially, but probably in some other parts of the country, especially where it's hard to get positive cash flow because it makes it a better cash flowing property. Okay. So 8.83 cash on cash return, talked about that. Now, do you have capital expenses? We had a whole class on capital expenses last week or the week before, I forget which one it was. But we had a whole class on capital expenses. Do you have capital expenses on properties where you have a tenant buyer buying from you in a year or two? Not usually, no. I mean, the idea is that you're going to sell the property to the tenant buyer, 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road or 4 years down the road, whenever they're able to go get their loan. As an aside, when you go to the book, the learntoberich.com/book, that page talks about using lease option exits as the model. And during that one, we assume it takes 4 years for your tenant buyer to buy. And that may be 4 one-year tenant buyers where one moves in 1 year and doesn't buy and moves in next year and doesn't buy. Another one moves in year 3 and doesn't buy. And finally, the one in year 4 buys. Or it could be, 2 people living there 2 years, or one living there 1 year and the next one living there 3 years and buying. So it's any variation of that. But on average, we're saying that only 25% of the tenant buyers per year buy. So I assume it takes 4 years in order for you to do that. Is it possible that on one of these deals, it could take you 6 years to exit? Sure, absolutely. You could go through one, the guy stays there for 3 years and decides he's not buying. You could do another one where the guy stays there for another 3 years and then they end up buying. So it could be 6 years. It could take longer than that. Could get to the point where you've gone 6 years and you haven't actually had a tenant buyer buy, and then you regular retail sell it through a real estate agent and actually just cash out. Say, okay, I'm good. I'm just going to sell it right now. And you make a profit that way. Okay. So for capital expenses, do we put any numbers here? Not usually. I mean, if we have that like $3,000 furnace come up unexpected, you could go ahead and put it in here. By the way, one of the nice things I like doing about lease option ones is I like doing new construction because they're all at the very early end of their kind of like maintenance cycle, and you're not going to have any unexpected repairs, and you have a warranty usually for the first year. And so I'm a big fan of buying a property that's new construction, offering it to a tenant buyer, and I would be even willing to buy a property on spec, not go ahead and get the tenant buyer there and have them pick a property from the MLS, but go ahead and go to a builder and say, I like this model because it's a really good rental model, and if tenant buyer didn't buy it after 4 or 5 years, I would be totally happy keeping this as a rental. You've got to go buy a brand new house in a brand new subdivision, and then you start advertising it while it's being built for the next 3 months, and then you find your tenant buyer over that 3-month period, and you have one lined up ready to go by the time the house is built. I like that model a lot, especially for nomads. Okay. Where was I? Cash on cash return, we talked about that. Capital expenses, we talked about that. So your cash on cash is after CapEx is the same. And then here is your cash on cash return when you include the depreciation benefit. And we talked about that a lot when we talked about the deal analysis, but that's at 11.61% return on your investment there. All right, so now here's where we're going to get into a slightly different section that we really didn't cover a lot in detail during the previous class. And this is the overall analysis when you're going to sell the property. So we're assuming that the sale price I'm selling the property to Elijah for is 3% more than what the ARV was. So the ARV here was $280 on the property, and I purchased it for $285. Okay, so in this particular example, I'm actually buying the property for $5,000 more than what the property's worth because I financed in the closing costs on the loan. So this property had to appraise for $285. Okay? So now that it appraised for $285, now these numbers change down here, and we're saying that the property is 3% above the sale price, 3% above the $285, which in year one, if they bought the property, they would agree to buy it for $293. Okay? Or if they bought it in year two, it would be $302. Okay? That's a 3% increase per year. Now you can override this. If I'm going to go to Elijah and I sit down with him, I say, Elijah, you're going to buy this property for $293,550. He's going to be like, that seems like a weird arbitrary number. Why not do more of a sales number and you do $294,900 for the price in year one, and then in year two it's $304,900, and so the prices now became $294 or $304,900, and so you could just go ahead and make these more rounded sales numbers and enter those in, and then this overrides whatever the sales price is there and kind of does the analysis. Okay, so you can go ahead and do it that way if you'd like as well. This is the cumulative cash flow, part of your profit. This is after CapEx. It's the same in this case. If you were going to give back your reserve account, you'd have that there. If you were going to charge any extension fees, so if you're going to say to Elijah, our agreement is for 2 years, and then after 2 years, I'm going to charge you $1,500 in year three in order to get another year to be able to buy the property. So those are extension fees, and you can kind of add those in here too in order to do that. That's how that works. In this case, we're not going to put them in there, but it is a legit thing to say to Elijah, okay, our agreement is for $11,000. You're going to be able to rent the property for 2 years. You're going to have the right to buy it anytime within those first 2 years for $304,900. Okay, so it's $304,900 in year one and year two. And if anytime during that period of time, you can go ahead and buy it from me. After that, if you want to buy the property, it's going to be $1,500 to renew each year that you do that, up to a maximum of 5 years. And then you'll be able to buy it for $314,900 in year three, $329,900 in year four, and $339,900 in year five. Okay, so you can just kind of put those numbers in there and you see how that works to set the price for what his strike prices are for each year. Here's the first loan amount balance. Remember, we're paying down the loan during those years, and that's our benefit as the investor. The initial investment is how much you put into the deal. This is crediting back the option fee. And then if you have sales costs, if you tell Elijah, I'm going to pay 1% toward sales costs. I'll pay like a title insurance policy or whatever it is. You put that in here. The way that I like to do it is I like to say that we're not paying any sales costs. You're paying the sales costs both on especially if you're buying it in the MLS for them up front. You're paying all the sales costs up front, and you're going to pay the sales costs when you buy. So you do have to pay 2 sales costs, but you get to live in the property now for a year or two, be in the schools, not have to move twice, and you get the any bonus appreciation over the 3% that we agreed to here. Okay, so go ahead and do that sales cost. You can put in a number there if you want to, and it'll add in some expenses to show that in there, but I'm going to put it at 0. So total profit on this deal is going to be $26,354 if Elijah buys it in year one, and our return on investment is about 55.48% for that year. If it goes to year two, it's $35,000 total profit, and our annualized return on investment is 36.89 per year. So you can see you get a little bit better returns when you're doing these lease option type deals. And so you can see kind of the return thing there, and it shows you the total profit here on the bottom. Okay, before I go back through and make some modifications, what questions do you have up to this point about the kind of lease option model, how we do the analysis, and then I'm going to go do a couple different tweaks to the scenario and show you how it impacts you kind of return on investment. Any questions? All right, in case any ones are coming, I'm going to go ahead and just keep moving forward. So let's start off with Donna's kind of question about doing a tenant buyer with a Nomad property. So let's say on your first property, Donna, you come in with 5% down. And then let's say in year two, you're getting an $11,000 option fee from a tenant buyer. And the spreadsheet doesn't work perfectly for doing this because it's starting in year two. So year one, 0 rent. In year two, let's call it $1,795 is what we're getting for rent there. And so we're really going to be looking primarily at year 2 numbers. Okay. Let's see what we can adjust here. Those numbers are right. Vacancy is right. So we're going to wait until we're going to wait to move out before we do that. Capital expenses, that's going to be fine. 3% sales price. So here we're going to go ahead and just see what it would be. So the property, if the property is really only going up 3% a year, it might be that. But let's say the property went up 6%. So really it's worth 302 at the end of year 1. So let's go ahead and just lock in 302. And so it's suggesting 311 for this. So let's say, yeah, 311 sounds good. Let's kind of keep it there. And then this 320. So those are going to be fine. So we'll kind of do it at this sales price for year 2 or 3 of a tenant buyer coming in there. And so in this year, if they were going to go, if they were going to come in and buy it, you'd make $15,000 total profit on them buying it from you in year 2, and your annualized return on investment would be 161.48%. Why? Because you originally had $15,000 in, and you got $11,000 of it back. So that's why the return is so high. So it's kind of crazy to think about that way. So basically what happens is when you're having nomads moving a property and put 5% down, and they're getting the overwhelming majority, if not all, of their return on investment, all of their initial investment back, their return goes to infinity. Because if you got your full amount back, you only put up whatever it was here, $15,750. If you were able to get an Elijah that came in and had $15,750 right here, it's crazy because you got all of your down payment back. You could then use that down payment in order to buy the next property, and that's what the entire book on the website is all about. It's waiting until you have a tenant buyer that has the full 3% down or 5% down payment ready to go for the next property, and that's why it's so good to do that. Okay, let's go back here. All right, 285, 5% down, rent ready costs. Let's go back here, $11,000. We had 302, extension fee. Let's not do an extension fee. No sales costs. And $17.95 for rent. Okay. So what questions do you guys have about the analysis? We should probably do some different variations of this. So let's say Elijah came in and we were doing 31.59% in year 1, 34.22% per year if he buys in year 2. Let's say he came in and he was going to do that $250 a month. How does that impact stuff? Well, it went from 31 to 37, and whatever it was before, 34 to 40.53. So it could significantly improve the return you're getting by even do these small changes where you kind of finance that. So Daniel says, I could see that it's going to be a major challenge to explain this to a skeptical potential lease option buyer. Sure. Yeah, I think that is one of the challenges that we have is explain to them, listen, you can go buy this property, and if you buy this property today for $285,000, that's great. If you can get the loan, you should do that. If you can't get the loan, I'm willing to buy it for $285,000. But then you'd be buying it from me for $293,000. Is paying $8,000 premium on a property a year later, is that going to be a big, a big increase for them? When property values are going up 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, a 10% increase would be $313,000. So that same property would be worth $313,000 if it went up 10%, and we're saying they could buy it for $293,000. That's the part you need to explain to them. And if they're going to go rent it, they're going to have to pay that rent no matter what. I mean, that is what market rent is. We're not inflating this number at all in order to do it. Although you could argue that you could get a small premium on rent doing that. Rebecca says, is the effective income tax rate the same as capital gains? No, it's not. The effective income tax rate is what we use for calculating the benefit from depreciation. And so when we do this section right here, depreciation amounts and then cash flow from depreciation, this takes into account the effective tax rate. you're going to pay long-term, if you hold it for more than a year, you're going to pay long-term cap gains on this profit. So it's an oversimplification because you're really paying, the tax rate as you earn the cash flow part of it. But on the sale part of it, when you get your proceeds, you're going to be paying depreciation recapture, and then which is at 25% for most people. And then you're going to pay 18,000. You're going to pay long-term cap gains, which is 15% for most people. After on the profit, on the net proceeds from the profit. So that's there. Daniel says, yes, was pointing out that they're up against time and appreciation will be a useful tool. Yeah, and it's not, we're not trying to convince people to do anything that they're not wanting to do, right? Daniel, imagine for a second that you came here and you were, starting your own business and you wanted to buy a house and you wanted your kids to go to a certain school and you thought you were going to have to rent for 2 years in order to do this. And I said, hey, listen, you could rent, but if you want to, I'm willing to buy a property in this neighborhood and you could buy from me over the next 2 years. And if property values go up more than 3%, it ends up being a win for you. If they go up 3%, then it really ends up being net equal to you. Basically, you end up able to buy the property, but you got to live there for 2 years and rent the property that you're buying. So it's really, as long as it's not less than 3% appreciation, it's not that big of a deal. If it is less than 3%, then you're probably still better off doing this deal, because if you had to go if you could buy the property now and you were going to sell after 2 years, then you'd probably be out more than that selling it with a real estate agent. So I think it's just a matter of being able to sit down with somebody and explain that to them. And if it's a good fit, perfect. If it's not, we're not trying to convince or persuade people. This is not a sales job. It is a job of just explaining people and letting them make a choice as to whether or not it makes sense to them. So sure. All right. Any other questions? You want me to run any different scenarios on this? I will tell you, the larger this gets, and we're talking about right here, 37, let's call it 38 and 40, 38% and 40 annualized. If you crank this up to 15,000, see, bumps up 41 and 44. So the more you can get in this upfront option fee, the better your overall return tends to be. And by the way, there is a 15% down investor loan now. So Elijah says, really just paying a fee to lock in a purchase price, which would be an amazing opportunity in this market. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And the other big benefit that a lot of people don't focus on is you get to move once. So imagine you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna move into a place. I got 2 years. I got to be there, and then I'm gonna go buy another property, and I want my kids in a certain school district. Well, now you can go and pick a property in that school district that you want. Rent that property for a year or two, and at the end of the year or two, you get to buy it and not have to move again. You're already there. There's no disruption to your kids in school. There's no kind of weird, moving twice. And if some people are super sensitive about this, but they want to be able to tell their neighbors that we're buying this property. They're not just renting. So, yeah, short list of benefits to the tenant would be useful. Yep, I talk about that in the tenant buyer sales and marketing class. I go into a lot of detail about the psychology of the tenant buyer, where they're coming from, what they're thinking, because a lot of them they've been beat up. I mean, they had bankruptcies and foreclosures and short sales and medical bills, and they're in many cases they're kind of recovering. And so you have to realize that they're definitely skeptical, and talking to them and making sure that it's structured as a win-win. And making sure that they feel comfortable and understand exactly what they're doing, and they have opportunity to go talk to their attorney and get advice and everything like that. It seems really reasonable to me. And again, if it's not a win for you and it's not a win for them, don't do the deal. It can't be a win for you and a non-deal for them. It can't be a non-deal for you and a win for them. It has to be win-win. Otherwise, just say, based on the numbers I'm seeing here, it's just not a good fit. So what happens if Elijah comes in and says, hey, because I get a lot of calls like this too, right? Elijah comes in and says, hey, listen, I don't have 15 grand, but I've got 3 grand. Would you do it for 3 grand? What do you think? $3,000? Let's say they can even pay $100 a month or $200 a month even. How does that look? Let's take a look. So your cash on cash return, still pretty good, 478, 13.91. We got anything weird in here? That seems really good. Oh, 15% down. Okay. So 549, 11.88. And then down here, still looking at 30% per year annualized return. The big downside of doing it this way is, would you be willing to go buy a property from the MLS, a property you might not otherwise be willing to buy if somebody only gave you $3,000 up front? My answer is no. I would not be willing to go buy a property that I would not otherwise be willing to buy. Now, think about it this way. Let's say someone came in and you already own the property. Let's say you bought a new construction property and it's under construction, and for some reason you can't find somebody that's got $10,000 down, which in my opinion is probably sort of where I would like to be ideally at a minimum. But let's say you can't find someone. Let's say the closest you got is someone with $3,000 down. Well, the alternative is renting to somebody, right? So if you were to rent to somebody, you would get no option fee right here. You'd get $17.95 a month rent. Yeah, you'd have, if you're doing straight rental, you'd put the vacancy back in and the maintenance back in, in order to get those up there, probably utilities back in there. So your numbers would be much worse. But even that is pretty decent if they put nothing down there. You bump it up to say, okay, I got $3,000 down. You can look at it one of two ways. You can either say, I just got $250 a month extra cash flow, right? $3,000 a year, it's $250 a month extra cash flow. Or I just got $3,000 cash flow in advance to do the deal. And so when you look at it that way, your cash on cash return kind of improves. Your numbers get a little bit better there than it was without that. So do it right here. Whoops. $250 a month. See, it improves your cash flow pretty considerably and improves your cash on cash return. So, if you're considering this versus a straight rental, I think this is a good way to do. So what's the downside of doing this? Why wouldn't you do this on every property? Well, you're giving up some of your upside, right? I mean, I told you from the very beginning, we want to leave some meat on the bone for the tenant buyer. We want to encourage them to close. We don't want to set them up and say, some people come to me and are like, hey, James, you know what I want to do? Let's go ahead and do a lease option, but let's set the price to be whatever the current appraised value is. If it appraises for $320, I want to sell it for $320. I want the whole thing. Yeah, if you can negotiate that, I don't personally think that's a true win-win, but maybe you can. Maybe you feel it is, and maybe the tenant buyer feels it is, and they're like, okay, we'll agree to go ahead and do whatever appreciation is. And so we'll have it appraised, and whatever it appraises for, that's what I'll sell for. What happens if it appraises for less? What happens if property values go down? Well, in this case, if properties went down, and you were doing this before, just like if you had a rental property, if property values went down, you would have a property that is worth less. The tenant buyer would probably not buy it from you because the strike price, the price that they're agreeing to buy from you, it's not going to appraise for that, and they're probably not willing to make up the difference. So you're going to need to convert this to a straight rental, or convert it to another lease option tenant buyer with a lower price later on, which I don't recommend you do. I'd rather see you convert it to a rental and hold it out more like a traditional Nomad than to take a loss. Because our traditional Nomad model, it doesn't matter if property values go down short term. It's the long-term thing that we want to do. And so if you were able to improve your cash flow on the property for the first two maybe, and the tenant buyer didn't actually cash you out at the end, but maybe property values dipped a little bit at that point, sure, just convert it to a straight rental, rent it out for a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it takes. And then at the end of that, you can go ahead and release option it, or you can just keep it and pay it off and do a straight Nomad with it. And you got a little boost early on from your returns. Get a little extra money up front from an option fee or an extra cash flow on the property. Do you ever see people combining the lease option with owner financing? Yes. So one of the more creative strategies is buying properties subject to the existing financing and then offering a lease option on the exit. So it's a little bit out of the scope of the usual Nomad class, but we're probably doing a class on this, I think next month. I think I put it on the calendar. But the idea is that you go and you find somebody who is considering foreclosure, and you offer to buy the property from them and make payments on their existing loan. You leave their loan in place. And so you can walk in there, you give them $5,000 to kind of security deposit and first month's rent on a new place, and pay them a little bit of their equity. And then you go in there and you actually take over the property. You start making payments on their existing loan. And then you immediately put a tenant buyer in there, and you do it. So you acquire the property creatively, either on a lease option, and then they call sandwich lease option. You acquire it on a lease option, and then you're lease optioning it as your exit. That's what a sandwich lease option is. Or you buy it subject to or all-inclusive deed of trust, wrap financing, and then you actually sell it on a lease option exit and do that. And so that's a traditional, very common model when you're doing creative financing. So yes, but not typically owner financing per se. It's although, you know, I have seen them done with owner financing. And then you can do whatever you want with the property. But you know, if I've got owner financing on a property, I'm not so sure I'm lease optioning exiting it, because usually the terms that I would get on owner financing, I'd want to keep that property. I wouldn't want to sell it, and so I'd probably keep that as a straight rental. I'd want to structure it that way. But yeah, that's sort of how it works. All right, you're very welcome. Any final questions? That was really the intent of the class, is to kind of go over the lease option exit and explain to you more about how that works and how we analyze it on the spreadsheet to do it. Any questions on how it works? What's going on with that? Anything like that? Going once. Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate that. Happy anniversary. Yeah, I don't know if you were on when we first started, but I am going to be taking Tammy out to grab dinner, probably at Olive Garden right after this. So thank you. All right, guys. Thank you very much. If I'll try to get the recording up here. It'll probably be either really late tonight or tomorrow by the time I get the recording posted. And there is a second version of this, I believe, that I recorded about a year ago. And just by the nature of what I'm thinking about when I'm presenting one night to another night, they do differ. They vary. And so, you know, premium Nomad guys can go ahead and access the previous recordings and do that. This one will be up for everybody so that you guys can discuss it on Thursday. But the old recordings are locked down for premium Nomads, at least they should be. And I'll go check on that too. So, all right, guys, thanks so much for coming. Have a great night. I will talk to y'all soon, and bye-bye for now. You're welcome.